So here I have just a little overview about the differences between the general test and the academic test. And like I mentioned earlier, we're going to focus on this academic test, but I'll just explain some major differences between the two. The major difference lies in the topics of the readings in the general reading test and the academic reading test. So if you're taking the general test, your reading excerpts are going to be related to companies or things you would find in everyday life, like hotel advertisements or company policies. Again, things that you would see on a day-to-day basis. In the academic test, on the other hand, your readings are going to be from scientific journals, perhaps some articles from newspapers or books. And the main theme is that these would be great for university study, undergraduate or graduate research, and they're a bit more intense, I think is a good word, because they require a lot of attention, and this is not reading for pleasure, the academic test. This is reading to understand a theory or to find information, and it's not something you would want to read on a plane, for example, or at the beach. So that's what makes it a bit more difficult as well. In any case, you're going to find 6 to 10 paragraphs in one passage, and it's going to be a narrative or descriptive style. And topics for the academic test could include something like anthropology, history, biology, linguistics, again, things that you would find in the university or academic setting. Also, something to note about this is that you'll have a lot of technical terms. Later, we'll talk a bit about vocabulary and some tips, but just keep in mind that the vocabulary for the academic test is a bit specific. And so in both exams, in both tests, you're going to have 3 reading sections with a total of 40 questions, and time-wise, you have 60 minutes for the whole section. You might think that's a lot, that's 1 hour, but we need to be smart about our timing, and this is something we'll talk about next. Timing is crucial because you have 3 sections, but you'll have at least 2 or 3 question types per passage. So this is something to keep in mind. So let's move on to timing. All right. Now, again, I'm focusing on the academic test. And when I'm looking at those 3 sections, I would say if you spend more or less 18 minutes per section, you're at a good place. Now, I'm an English teacher, I'm not a math teacher, but if 18 minutes for 3 sections comes to about 54 minutes, more or less, you're going to have about 5 to 6 minutes to check your answers and also transfer them to your answer sheet. Okay, so also transfer and checking is part of these 60 minutes, hour that you have. This is important because perhaps you have a very difficult passage in section 1, but you've decided to skip ahead and complete the rest of the sections, which is a good idea. If you have time remaining, you can perhaps use it to check your information in section 1. Never a bad idea to have some time at the end for this. I wouldn't go overboard, however, so I wouldn't do much more than 5 to 6 minutes because you want to have enough time spent on your reading and your passages. All right, so here are 3 question types. We have identification, matching, and completion. So you'll notice that we have 3 different question types in identification, 4 in matching, and 4 in completion. Now, I'm not a math teacher, but I think that would give us 11 different question types. And we'll be looking at these different question types briefly in this video, but we also have videos that go more in depth for each one. Just to give you a little overview here, identifying information and identifying the writer's argument are similar in that you'll have to answer questions that are similar to true and false or answering yes and no. The difficult part about this is that there's an option not given, and this usually confuses students. We'll go ahead and look at this together. Multiple choice is something that students have seen in the school setting or university setting. It's probably the most familiar type of question, and you'll have to identify the main points and identify the answer to your question from a group of options. Then we have our matching questions, and we have 4 of them. So information, headings, features, and sentence endings, and we will look at these as well. And lastly, we have our completion, where you'll either have to complete a summary or a sentence or a table that has certain gaps. And the short answer question would also be a form of completion because you are writing out the answers. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. So here's a lovely example of an identifying information question type. And you have your passage on the right-hand side. In this case, for the example, we're not going to go in depth on the reading passage. We're going to pay attention to what the questions are asking you to do. So here you'll be given statements relating to the passage. So for example, we see a statement here, chronobiology is the study of how living things have evolved over time. Again, very academic in nature, but this is a statement. And your job will be to answer whether or not the statement is true, or if it's false, or if this information is not given in the passage. It's really important that you don't rely on outside information for this question type. Let's say that you're a master of chronobiology and you know all about it. Unfortunately, that is not going to help you for this exam because you'll have to rely on the information in the passage and the information in the passage alone. This is notorious for being one of the most difficult question types. So I've started with the most difficult, but it's one of the most difficult because students confuse the answers false and not given. Now, false would be answered if the statement contradicts what is located in the passage. It's not given if the passage doesn't contain the information. And this can be confusing. It's very tricky. You might think that you've read something that contradicts this statement, but perhaps it doesn't. So this takes some time to get used to. Of course, true would be answered if the statement agrees with the information in your passage. For this reason, we are going to look at this example at the end of our video when I take you through a step-by-step example. So don't worry, we're going to approach this and I'm going to show you just how you can tackle it. So keeping in line with the identification, we have identifying the writer's views or claims, similar in nature, because you have answers that range from yes, no, and not given. So you guessed it, the confusing part here will be the difference between no and not given. It's a bit similar to the identifying information in that you would answer no if the statement contradicts the claims of the writer, and you would answer not given if it's impossible to say this, so if this information is not included in the passage. This can also be quite tricky because you have to think of what the writer says or the writer's views, and it's a bit different than true and false. You can follow the same strategy though for the identifying information question type. And now we see our classic multiple choice. It's a familiar question type, so if you have strategies like process of elimination that you've used in the past for this question type, don't forget that because process of elimination is an excellent strategy to use for this question. Of course, you're going to have a question and a number of options, and you'll have to choose the correct answer from the options you're given. Now, this question can range. So our example here has 4 options, and you'll have to choose one of them. However, some multiple choice questions will ask you to find 2 answers out of 5 or 3 answers out of 6. So this question does have 3 different variants, and you'll have to be prepared for all 3. The strategy is the same. You'll want to use your process of elimination, read everything clearly, and underline your keywords. Again, we'll talk about strategy later on, but just be aware that you'll have to choose the best option from a selection. Students find this multiple choice question more or less like what they have been exposed to in school or when practicing anything academic. So it's not too much of a surprise. You just have to make sure that you're using process of elimination wisely and that you're not letting time get away from you. All right, here we have our matching information question. So now we're going to look at our matching questions. And the first one, matching information. This is also one of those infamous question types on the exam that students dread getting. I'll explain why. Now here you're going to be asked to match statements. So here we see them in 14 through 19 to paragraphs. So for example, you have paragraph A, paragraph B, and so on. So you'll have to match these statements to the paragraph. And sometimes you'll see these lovely notes that say, you may use any letter more than once. And so you can't use process of elimination in these cases because one could be used more than once. This is also something to keep in mind and watch out for. It's a little bit tricky because students think they have to understand all of the information that's presented, but in reality, you don't need to understand what the whole paragraph is about. You just need to find specific information in the paragraph and match it to one of these statements. The answer is usually in a whole phrase or in a sentence instead of just a single word. So you'll really have to use your scanning and skimming techniques, which we will talk about later on in this video. Bottom line, with this, you'll need to make connections with your examples and the passage. Now, students tend to like the matching headings question type. It's a bit different because it tests your ability to understand the main idea of each paragraph. So here we see section A, for example, section B, and so forth. You'll be given more or less 5 headings. So we see them on the left-hand side, 5 to 7 headings, and you have to match each paragraph in the reading to one heading. And there are always more headings than paragraphs, so you're going to have some left over. Again, you can't really use process of elimination in this case, but you're just looking for the main idea. So the skimming technique would also be good in the matching headings question. Now again, for our third matching, we have matching features. You have your reading passage on the right-hand side here. And in this case, you need to make connections with very specific details in the passage. And it's very specific. So for example, our answer options A through E would answer 7 through 10. So we'd have to see, for example, which group used black powder, rocket-propelled arrows, and we would scan for this information. So scanning is where you would specifically look for this information in your passage and use that to answer your questions. This is a very quick type of question type because if you have a great scanning technique, you'll be able to scan quickly, find the answer it, and move on. And we're also going to show you an example of a matching features question in our example. And this will be great because we're pairing up, I don't want to say an easy, but we're pairing up an easier type of question with a more difficult question type. So you can see how you can approach these two question types together. So stick around for that. Now for this matching sentence question, you will have some options in a table that go along with the incomplete sentences, which would be your questions. So for example, you see 8 passive smoking, and then it would go along with one of these options. Compared with a non-smoker, a smoker would go along with one of these options. So you would use the same matching techniques that we have looked at and that we will look at in our videos. And it's interesting because in this case, you can also look at grammar. The more difficult question types and passages will have options that contain grammar that makes sense in all of these questions. Sometimes you can eliminate options based on grammar alone, but it's always best to confirm your answers in the passage. So in this case, again, we're matching incomplete sentences with possible endings. Now for our completion. Here, for example, we have a summary completion. It's very straightforward. You have to complete a summary based on information in the passage. And I've included a summary here with a text box below. Sometimes your summary completion questions will have a text box. Other times, you'll have to find the information and words directly from the passage. So this will not always be an option. This will not always be included in your summary completion. The strategy is the same though, And you do have to watch out for these text boxes because it's rare that the passages themselves will have these very specific words. You might have a different form of the word. So for example, instead of descriptivists, which explains a person or a group of people, you might have the idea, so descriptivism, or you might have the theory. Something to watch out for. If you don't have a text box, you won't necessarily get confused with these different types of words. And then similar to summary completion is a table completion. And so this is also very straightforward in that you have a table with columns, rows. In this case, we're looking at species, something French, something Spanish, and South African ball, quite specific here. And we just have to fill in this table based on information in the passage. It is interesting to note that with any type of completion question, if you don't have a word box, the directions will specify how many words you must or mustn't write. So this case, it says choose no more than 3 words, and that means I cannot write more than 3 words. It also means that my answer could be 1 word or 2 words, as you see here. It's a bit tricky, but you know that you cannot write more than 3 words. So the options will vary. It always depends on the instructions at hand. Always keep in mind that a number would also be considered a word. We get really detailed about this in our table completion lesson, so go ahead and have a look at that as well. And now we have our sentence completion. In this case, we are completing sentences that we see here with gap fills with information found in our lovely passage. Here, another example, it says no more than 3 words can be used for filling out these answers. So that's also something to keep in mind. Again, they could change. So it could be 1 word only, no more than 2 words and a number, or no more than 3 words. So do make sure to read that. These types of questions are just as much vocabulary tests as they are reading tests because they require you to be aware of paraphrasing and synonyms. So different ways to repeat a sentence or words with the same or very similar meanings. Because if this sentence were included in the passage, it would be far too easy. And this test is also going to analyze your critical thinking skills, comprehension, paraphrasing, synonyms. And so you'll have to be aware of different ways to say these various sentences. And now we have our short answer. This is also a completion question because you have to write out your answers. Again, we have our example of no more than 3 words for each answer. And you'll just have to either complete a sentence or answer a question. And in this case, you would be answering questions. So you would see for number 3, for example, during which decade were lifestyle risks seen as the major contributions to poor health? And already the fact that you see decade, you know that you probably have to write a number. And so a number also would count as a word. So 1 number would be 1 word. Usually these types of questions are paired up with factual information. So you're not going to have to think about the writer's views or his or her opinions when doing these question types. All right, so that was our overview of question types. Just to make it easy, I paired up this lovely table with questions that are usually in order and questions that are rarely in order. I think you're more apt to remember it looking at it this way instead of saying it after each question type. So if you look at this table, the matching questions, so matching headings, matching information, matching features, these are rarely in order. So if you find the answer to number 1 in paragraph C, the answer to number 2 might be in paragraphs A or B. These questions on the left-hand side, on the other hand, usually appear in order. So that means if you find the answer to number 1 in a multiple choice question in paragraph B, there probably isn't going to be an answer in paragraph A because that comes before your first answer. This is helpful when understanding timing and strategy. However, the IELTS exam could also trick you or contain something that is not necessarily in order. So use this as a guide But always be aware to use your best critical thinking skills when you take the test. I think this table does a really nice job of showing you the majority of the questions are usually in order, and these matching questions are rarely in order. So always keep that in mind. The only matching question that usually comes in order is this matching sentence endings. Okay, so we've looked at our question types. Let's get into strategy. So I have some 4 steps that you can use as a general strategy. Again, if you look into our videos for each question type, we get very specific with do's and don'ts and the best way to go about each specific question type. But as an overview, I think it's a great idea to just go through a strategy. If you don't have a strategy, you should adopt this one. If you have a different strategy, I'd encourage you to think twice about it and hear me out with this strategy. First off, no matter what question type, you want to read your questions first. I can't tell you how many students read the passage first, and this is probably the worst strategy. And reading the passage first is not doing you any favors. In fact, it's hurting you in terms of timing and also comprehension. You never want to read the passage first because you'd be reading blindly. You'd be reading for enjoyment, really. If you enjoy reading academic texts, that's one thing. But for this test, this is not reading for pleasure. You want to read to get your answers correct. And so in order to do that, you have to read your questions first to understand the strategy you have to use, the information that you're looking for, and that will help you succeed in this exam. So above all else, the golden rule is to read the questions. Once you've done that and you have looked at the theme and the ideas and you have a better understanding at what you'll need to read for in the passage, this means that you're reading the passage for an objective, okay? So you're reading for an objective. And in order to do that, we have 2 strategies that I talked briefly about during our question type analysis, and that is scanning and skimming. These are our 2 reading twins, excellent strategies. Let's talk about them a little bit more. Okay, so I have separated this page into scan and skim with some very helpful images that I always think of when I think of these 2 strategies. Let's start with scanning. Basically, if you are scanning, I want you to think about it like you are reading with headlights. So think of this, your lights. If you're driving at night or in the evening, you have to drive with your headlights because you have to see things. You have to see an animal crossing the road, or you have to see people crossing the road. And so in this case, when you are scanning, you are reading for specific information with your headlights because you have to read and you have to see certain terms or certain phrases that you have picked apart from your first step, which is read the questions. So this scanning technique is extremely important because you cannot read the whole passage in 3 different sections, answer all of your questions, and be expected to succeed in 60 minutes. You need to really pick and choose the words you're looking for, and you have to narrow your search. So scanning is excellent for picking out specific information. Then you have skimming, which is different. This is reading to get the gist or the general idea of your text. You're not looking for specific information. You're looking about how you can think of this information and understand a summary or the main idea. So you're actually thinking here to get the gist, the main idea. You won't have specific information readily available. You'll have the idea though, and that can help with specific question types. Basically what I do is I will scan for information. Once I see a promising word, I'll stop there, I'll highlight, and then I will skim quickly. Again, I'm not reading for pleasure, I'm reading quickly in order to get a gist or to understand what I am reading in a general sense. And then that usually helps me answer the questions. Above all, it's really important not to rely on just one of these. In our specific videos, we look at question types that call specifically for scanning or for skimming or a mix of both. And I usually find that each passage will contain a mix of scanning and skimming. So you really need to practice these two strategies. Now, my third step is going to be taking notes. So as you are reading the passage for your objective, you will probably find yourself making notes in the margins of your passage, or maybe placing stars like this as to where you found information that could be helpful for a certain question. It really doesn't matter which system you use for taking notes. You could draw symbols, or you could draw stars or underline. The important thing is that you are referencing areas of the text that will help you answer your question. It's really important because if you read something and then you think to yourself, oh, that's an excellent sentence for this question I have, and then you keep on reading, it's going to be very difficult for you to return to that specific sentence, and it's going to take a lot of your time. So use your note-taking system, whichever type you prefer. Just make sure you do it. And then after that, the last step, the last thing to do is to answer wisely. Very important word here. Answer wisely. You are going to understand the question, read for an objective, take your notes, use all of that information to the best of your ability, and answer wisely. And answering wisely is very important for your final score. So here we are with scoring. And like I said earlier, each question is worth 1 point. And that's why it's in your favor to know which question types are easiest for you so that you can start there. Nobody said you have to start with section 1 and finish with section 3. You can pick and choose. And that's why practice is so important. You can know where to begin and use it as a map. Now, the IELTS academic reading test scores can vary. We don't know their exact methodology for scoring. Don't worry too much about that. Just keep this handy table in mind. So the 9 band score is the highest score you can get. That would place you at 39 to 40 questions correct. So you have 40 questions to begin with. If you're getting a 9, that means you have perhaps 1 error. And the list goes down from there. Every time you practice, you should be keeping track of your scores for your different question types. And honestly, think of it as you are an athlete. So you are tracking your best times, you're understanding your best strategies, your best question types. It's actually really fun, and you can see your growth and your improvement over time. Now, these are just general tips and tricks that are good for either the academic test or the general test, or really just improving your English in general. However, these are great for the reading test. Of course, the best tip that I can think of is to read, and read some more even when you can't any longer. And what I mean by this is just reading anything you can get your hands on. Magazines, newspapers, books, subtitles even of films or documentaries. Read everything. This will get you into the habit of reading in English. It will get you into the habit of being exposed to different words. And it goes along really well with tip number 2, which is improve your vocabulary. The more you read, the more you're going to improve your vocabulary. I find a really good way to do this is to read, and then when you come across a new word, make a tiny flashcard or write down the word with a definition. I think using flashcards is an excellent way to do this because on one side of the flashcard, you could write the word in English. On the back, you could write the definition. And then once you have a nice amount of cards, you can play a memory type of game and lay all your cards out on the table with the word facing up. Once you have the definition, you can put that card away and consider it one of your new words that you can use and understand. So it's really important to revisit anything you can read and new words. And lastly, practice makes perfect, like with anything in life. So the more you read, the more you practice, the more you'll feel comfortable with the exam, and the more you practice different passages and different question types and different mock exams, the better your outcome will be. Okay, now I don't want you to get nervous and I don't want you to develop any sort of bias against certain question types, but we've separated them into levels of difficulty. So we have easy, medium, and difficult. This is just based on data and student feedback, but normally the matching headings questions and the short answer questions tend to be easiest for students because these questions require the least amount of reading. So students are able to scan quickly, find their answers, and then move on. On the other hand, these three questions, identifying information, identifying writer's claims, and matching information, are known as those difficult questions because it requires a lot of reading, both scanning and skimming. And of course, with these two famous question types, there is the confusion between not given and no for writer's claims and not given and false for identifying information. So just be aware of this. The other questions are basically medium in difficulty. They are your standard test questions and things that you can expect from academic reading and academic questions. Just be aware of this. It might be different for you, or you might find that you agree with this table. Today, however, we will combine a difficult question and a medium difficulty question in our example, and I'll show you how I chose to approach handling these two question types together.